Our topic on neural science. Neural science is a chapter in psychiatry. Neural science talks about the human brain, psychiatry and the human brain. It also talks about psychopharmacology, endophenotypes, psychiatry and the human genome, individual genes and mental disorders, nature and nurture within the CNS, that means central nervous system. Mental disorders reflect abnormalities in neuroanatomical circuits and synaptic regulation. Why not a genetic based diagnostic system? Lesson from neurology. Examples of complex human behaviors. And there is another subchapter in neural science, that is functional neuroanatomy. New functional neuroanatomy talks about brain organization, sensory systems, somatosensory system, development of the somatosensory system, visual system, development of the visual system, auditory system, development of the auditory system, olfaction, development of the olfactory system, taste, autonomic sensory system, alteration of conscious sensory perception through hypnosis, motor systems, basal ganglia, cerebellum, motor cortex, autonomic motor system, primitive reflexes circuit, localization of brain functions, and then neural sciences and functional neuroanatomy talks about language. So here we are going to talk in detail about language. What is language? What is the function of language? What problems do people face in acquiring or learning a particular language? The clearest known example of hemispheric lateralization is the localization of language functions to the left hemisphere, starting with the work of Pierre Broca and Karl Wernicke in the 19th century. Researchers have drawn a detailed map of language comprehension and expression. At least 8 types of aphasias in which one or more components of the language pathway are involved have been defined. Prosody, the emotional and affective components of language or body language, appears to be localized in a mirror set of brain units in the right hemispheres. Because of the major role of verbal and written language in human communication, the neuroanatomical basis of language is the most completely understood association function. Language disorders, also called aphasias, are readily diagnosed in routine conversation, whereas perceptual disorders may escape notice except during detailed neurophysiological testing, although these disorders may be caused by injury of an equal volume of cortex. Among the earliest models of cortical localization of function were Broca's 1865 description of a loss of fluent speech caused by a lesion in the left anterior frontal lobe and Wernicke's 1874 localization of language comprehension to the left superior temporal lobe. Subsequent analysis of patients rendered aphasic by strokes, trauma, or tumors have led to the definition of the entire language association pathway from sensory input through the motor output. Language most clearly demonstrates hemispheric localization of function. In most persons, the hemisphere dominant for language also directs the dominant hand. 90% of the population is right-handed and 99% of right-handers have left hemispheric dominance for language. Of the 10% who are left-handers, 67% also have left hemispheric language dominance, The other 33% have either mixed or right hemispheric language dominance. This innate tendency to lateralization of language in the left hemisphere is highly associated with any asymmetry of the planum temporal, a triangular cortical patch on the superior surface of the temporal lobe that appears to harbor Wernicke's area. Patients with mixed hemispheric dominance for language lack the expected asymmetry of the planum temporal. That asymmetry has been observed in prenatal brain suggests a genetic determinant. Indeed, the absence of asymmetry runs in families, although both genetic and intrauterine influences probably contribute to the final pattern. Language comprehension is processed at three levels. First, in phonological processing, individual sounds such as vowels or consonants are recognized in the inferior gyrus of the frontal lobes. Phonological processing improves if lip reading is allowed, if speech is slowed, or if contextual clues are provided. Second, lexical processing matches the phonological input with recognized words or sounds in the individual's memory. Lexical processing determines whether a sound is a word. Recent evidence has localized lexical processing to the left temporal lobe, where the representations of lexical data are organized according to semantic category. Third, semantic processing connects the words to their meaning. Persons with an isolated defect in semantic processing may retain the ability to repeat words in the absence of an ability to understand or spontaneously generate speech. Semantic processing activates the middle and superior gyri of the left temporal lobe, whereas the representation of the conceptual content of words is widely distributed in the context. Language production proceeds in the opposite direction from the cortical semantic representations through the left temporal lexical nodes to either the oromotor phonological processing area for speech or the graphomotor system for writing. Each of these areas can be independently or simultaneously damaged by a stroke, trauma, infection, or tumor, resulting in a specific type of aphasia. The garbled word salad or illogical utterances of an aphasic patient leave little uncertainty about the diagnosis of left-sided cortical injury, but the right hemisphere contributes a somewhat more subtle but equally important affective quality to language. For example, the phrase I feel good may be spoken with an infinite variety of shadings, each of which is understood differently. The perception of prosody and the appreciation of the associated gestures or body language appear to require an intact right hemisphere. Behavioral neurologists have mapped an entire pathway for prosody association in the right hemisphere that mirrors the language pathway of the left hemisphere. Patients with right hemisphere lesions who have impaired comprehension or expression of prosody may find it difficult to function in society despite their intact language skills. Developmental dyslexia is defined as an unexpected difficulty with learning in the context of adequate intelligence, motivation, and education. Whereas speech consists of the logical combination of 44 basic phonemes of sounds, reading requires a broader set of brain functions and thus is more susceptible to disruption. The awareness of specific phonemes develops at about the age 4 to 6 years and appears to be prerequisite to acquisition of reading skills. Inability to recognize distinct phonemes is the best predictor of a reading disability. Functional neuroimaging studies have localized the identification of letters to the occipital lobe adjacent to the primary visual cortex. Phonological processing occurs in the inferior frontal lobe, and semantic processing requires the superior and middle gyri of the left temporal lobe. Whereas phonological gyrus bilaterally, careful analysis of an individual's particular reading deficits can guide remedial tutorial efforts that can focus on weaknesses and thus attempt to bring the reading skills up to the general level of intelligence and verbal skills. In children, developmental nonverbal from right hemisphere organizations, problems with mathematics, and incomplete or disturbed socialization. Patients with non-fluent, apparently because many aspects of music is represented predominantly in the right hemisphere, but the full complexity of musical ability is similar to transfer many musical skills from the right hemisphere to the left as they gain proficiency in musical analysis and performance. So that's all about language and language learning process and difficulties in the functional neuroanatomy of the chapter Neural Sciences in the book Synopsis of Psychiatry. I do hope you have enjoyed listening to the topic on language on from the viewpoint. You can make your comment here.